Good to see everybody. How you doing?
Good.
All right. Today we're going to hit a topic called the last two suppers. It takes a long time to get through this whole last week of Jesus Christ's life. I sent a couple of handouts around here. And there's 2 pages. So today we're going to cover the topic of the 2 last suppers that Jesus had with his disciples. Now, why is this important? Because more detail goes into these final days of Jesus Christ's ministry than any other time mentioned in the Bible. And they're both we may want to take a closer look to both of these. It has to be a big reason. You ever notice how time slows down when an event speeds up? You know, and it seems like time slowed down on these 4 Gospels with these 4 Gospel writers near the end of each book. And incredible detail is going to go into each meal, each movement, and each conversation. And even the writers who weren't in attendance at those Last Suppers, Mark and Luke, they saw in vivid detail in their mind's eye via revelation something incredibly important. And you ever had something cataclysmic happen in your life, something bad, or maybe even something really great, and then it seemed like slow motion. I remember flying off of a mountain bike one time in New Mexico, and I went over this little rise, and I was going through the air, and it all seemed like slow motion. And I remember spinning through the air thinking, if I die, my wife's going to kill me. But I can still picture it in my mind. And I didn't die. I did get the breath knocked out of me. And so it's pretty crazy. But in filmmaking, more film is used during a slow motion scene than in a fast motion scene. And so more film, more detail. And the same is true with the Gospels. More words, more detail. Timing is everything. And this first meal is probably 2 days before his burial, which would make it probably Monday night. Now, I know a lot of people teach he died on Friday, but almost any researcher will show you that it was actually a Wednesday. But we're not going to get into that today. And so Jesus once again told his disciples that he was going to be betrayed and crucified in 2 days. Now, I want you to start thinking in your minds, how would you feel if you knew somebody you'd followed for a year? You'd left your family. You'd quit your job. You might have left your kids. How would you feel if this guy told you that he was going to be dead in 2 more days? At the same time he was telling them that, at that exact time, the chief priests and the scribes who were lawyers and the elders were once again trying to calculate how to plan to decoy, capture, and kill the Christ. So they were happening at the same moment. And so now we're going to talk about the second to last supper. And this second to last supper was held in Bethany at a house of Simon the leper. Now this was a guy who once had leprosy and somehow had been delivered from it by Jesus or another way, we don't know. And they still called him that. I mean, Josephine has an aunt that her whole life they called her Fatty. And now by the time she's an adult, it was not a cut. That was just her name. After a while, it was just what they called her. And so it didn't mean her shape. It was just her name by that point. Well, this was Simon the leper. It was 2 miles out of Jerusalem. It was in the same small town that Lazarus, the guy he had raised from the dead who'd been dead for 4 days, was with. And I think about that. I think about how Lazarus was 4 days in the grave. And then when Jesus Christ told him to rise up, he was in all those grave clothes. It's like 100 pounds of wrapping. And he walks out of this thing. And it just blew people's minds. But I think about how Jesus knew that he was going to be dead for 3 days and 3 nights. So he thought, if I can raise this guy 4 days dead, 3 days is nothing. So this is sort of funny. So go to Mark chapter 14. And so this is there. He's in the same town as Lazarus, but he's not at his house like he was a few nights prior. He's at Simon the leper's house. And after 2 days was the feast of Passover, 2 days coming up, and unleavened bread. This is verse 1. And the chief priests and the scribes sought how they might take him by craft. Craft. And put him to death. Such happy thoughts of religious people. You'll find the most religious people are usually the most mean. But they said, but not on the feast day. I like that song. Not on the feast day. Like the song, What Did the Fox Say? And lest there be an uproar of the people. And being in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at meat, there came a woman having an alabaster box of ointment. Box is a container. Of spikenard, very precious. And she brake the box, or that container, and poured it on his head. Doesn't seem like that big of a deal, pouring some oil on somebody's head. But just so you understand how precious this vase and this oil was, let me put it in perspective. This vase would have been hand-carved of a soft stone, a little softer than marble, called alabaster. And it was so important that the Egyptians would use this, and they would carve these ornate jars for perfume, and also these ornate jars to put the organs of the kings in. Because when they would mummify them, they'd put the organs in these jars and set it near their sarcophagus. Sort of bizarre, but it was that important. And these things took a long time to make. And the oil that was in there was worth about a year's wage for a working man. How much do you earn in a year? So this woman, it says she came in, she busted the top of this because it probably wouldn't open. It probably had fused together, calcified. And then she commences to pour this on the head of Jesus Christ. A year's wage. Verse 4. And there were some that had so a few of these 12, few of these apostles, Jesus Christ's closest followers, had indignation within themselves and said, why was this waste of ointment made? They said this. For it might have been sold for more than 300 pence. Now, 300 pence isn't 300 pennies. 1 pence was one day's wage for a working man. So this is 300 working days of pay. What do you earn each day? And it could have been given to the poor, and they murmured against her. Now, it was customary to anoint the head of a guest with oil. And the greater the guest, the better the oil. And this woman went all out. She didn't just drip a little bit. She poured the full container on him and probably gently rubbed it into his hair. Probably felt good. And Jesus heard his disciples openly reproving this woman for wasting her money by pouring her oil on him. How would you feel if your best friends, your disciples, called a gift to you a waste? Just think, these guys had been with them, and they're calling what this woman did a waste. 3 or 4 days before this, Mary, the sister of Lazarus, in Bethany, poured the exact same dollars amount worth of this same costly oil on Jesus' feet. So now he is anointed from foot to head. And they did this for his burial. They knew he was going to die. They believed he was going to die. And this is a long-lasting oil, the smell. I mean, you ever had somebody rubbed up against somebody who had perfume and it's like stuck on you? It's like, Well, I mean, this would have stuck, especially all this amount. And the cool thing about it is he probably even smelled this when he was hanging on that tree. Just that whiff of love. Something. Maybe even when he rose from the dead, it was still there. Wasn't that many hours and days after that. So it's just a food for thought there. See, the day that Mary did this, only Judas commented that it had been a waste. So within 3 or 4 days, these other guys had joined in to thinking that it was a waste to give good money to the Christ. Just baffling to me. It's baffling, but it's human. Very human. This would be like watching your mom put her $50,000 diamond ring into the casket right before it was closed and watch it get lowered into the grave. Your inheritance just buried. Just think about it. That would be, it's like, what just happened? I mean, those ointments could have been handed down from generation to generation. It could be like an emergency savings, a dowry, an inheritance. I mean, it's worth a lot of money. Verse 6 of Mark 14. And Jesus said, let her alone. Why trouble you her? Why are you giving her a hassle? She's wrought a good work in me. For ye have the poor with you always. And whensoever ye will, ye may do them good. You can do them good anytime you want. He said, but me, you don't have always. I'm only going to be here a couple more days, folks. And she hath done what she could. She come aforehand to anoint my body for the burying. Isn't that something? So it's probably an oil they would have put on somebody who was dying. Remember, they also didn't have embalm people, and they didn't have refrigeration. So anything to cut the smell would have been nice. Did it for his burying. Verily I say to you, whosoever this gospel shall be, or wheresoever this gospel shall be preached throughout the whole world, this also that she hath done shall be spoken of for a memorial to her. That's what we're doing right now. This is a memorial to her. So the same night he gives the memorial of communion. So sort of wild. And Jesus jumps in to correct their warped thinking as well as taking care of her heart. And it's amazing that what he said about this unidentified woman. She's never named. Never named. It wasn't like there was a huge crowd in that room, because you can read where he went in there with his 12. So anybody who came in there was just came in to serve or to do something. Pretty wild. She will always be remembered for this deed. That's something. That's what Jesus Christ was saying. Judas thought differently. Verse 10, and Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, he's one of my disciples, went unto the chief priests to betray unto them. So he left. Now, this is the night before the Last Supper. So he went out that night and cracked a deal with the high priest, with the scribes, the elders. And when they heard it, they were glad. They were glad and promised to give him money. And he sought how he might conveniently betray them. So now he's going, okay, I got some money now. I got a little jingle. Now I'm going to figure out how to get this guy caught. That was the business deal. They were happy that they could now murder the Christ. What a crazy thing. You know, Matthew 26, 15 and 16, don't turn there, but it says, Judas asked him, what are you going to give me, if I deliver him up to you? And they told him 30 pieces of silver. And see, Judas wanted money. The priest wanted Jesus. Hey, it's just business. It's just business. Just a business deal. And most of you know that the 30 pieces of silver was the official payment laid out by the law of Moses for accidentally killing somebody's slave or lowly worker. That's Exodus 21:32. And it's amazing how God shows us the monetary worth of the life of Christ to two different people. To Judas, he was worth the price of a slave. To this woman, he was worth everything she had, a year's wage. Something. So the attitude of heart will come to play again. This same attitude will come to play when we get into the crucifixion in a few weeks. And, the evening ends with Judas cracking a deal with the bad guys. The next day passes, probably Tuesday. Now we're going into the Last Supper. It's almost evening. And one day, Jesus Christ is going to give up his life. He knew it. How would you feel if you knew tomorrow you were going to be dead? What would you do with your time? Who would you spend it with? It didn't say his mom was here, though she was probably with him in that whole entourage. He had to get this stuff set up so that when he left, they could take over and move this ministry that he started. That's a commitment. That's focus. The pressure's on. And he tells Peter and John to go into town, probably Jerusalem. And to find a guest room for them to stay in, all the 12, which is 13 people total, including Jesus, and to do Passover. And he tells them when they see a man carrying a water pitcher, which means he's probably carrying it on his head, to follow him right into the house that he walks into. And that's going to be the place. Now, you think, well, that would be a common sight, but actually, no. Because men didn't carry water on their head. In fact, even today, in the cultures where they do it, it's always a woman's job. Men carried like a leather bag, like you've seen the backpacks people wear with a bladder. Well, they had a bag, a leather bag they would carry with the water. This guy carried it like a woman. And they followed him into his house. And they were probably wealthy people because they ended up going to an upper room. Most houses were one level. They were just sticks and dirt. So this had to be built better. And so this was sort of a upper end bed and breakfast of the day. And the room was already furnished. If you read in Mark 14:12 through 16, for a larger group to celebrate Passover together. Remember, there was people coming from all over the world in there, and they wouldn't have rented this out to anybody but a group large enough to fill that space, and people wouldn't want to pay for that. And Peter and John were the setup crew, so they went in and got everything set up just so. And so for you to picture this in your mind, I'm going to have to describe to you how people ate in Roman-occupied Israel in the first century. And it's not how you think. Triclinium. And they would have reclined on what the Romans called a triclinium. And the Judeans adopted this room setting. It's a way to set a room because it was perfectly situated for long, drawn-out meals where there's a lot of dialogue. You notice when you turn the TV on and you have friends over, you don't talk anymore unless you happen to be married to an Italian. But in the first century, the entertainment was each other. It was the fellowship. It was the conversations and the banter. And that's what these guys were used to. And it happened most evenings. Even some of the first century synagogues had different rooms set up in this triclinium formation. Now, what this means is it was mats or low benches laid out in a U formation. You've seen like conference rooms where you have a big table at the front and then two tables coming down the side, and the big wig sits right in the middle at the front. Well, it's sort of like that, but just think of that being a platform like 6 feet long, and then in the middle is where the food would have been. It might be on a lower bench. It could be just on the floor. But they would all lay down on their sides, and everybody's head's facing in. It'd be like if you're sitting around a campfire and everybody's just laying there on the ground, and your heads are all facing and you're talking to each other, kind of thing. So that's how the Romans did this. And the Judeans picked this up in many ways. Remember, it's sort of a Roman Judean culture. It's a mix now. Just like you can't go anywhere in the world and not see McDonald's or Coca-Cola. I mean, our culture is integrated into every culture now. Almost everybody speaks English. And so many they wear clothes. Just think about it, the Western soccer clothes. You see those everywhere. Football jerseys. But so they're on this U-shaped bedding. Just think of little individual futons, just laid around like mats in a U shape. Okay, and then the person on this side, the head of this, like if this is a U right here, the head wouldn't be the head of the table. The head of the table is on the far left side, the second one in. Just look it up for yourself. Then the two special guests, one is on their right side, one's on their left. So it'd be 1, 2, 3. And then the lowest ranking person in that fellowship or that room would be the person on the far left at the end of that, at the last spot, right at the end of the table or the last mat available. It's so they can get up and serve. They can get up and down. They're the ones who serve everybody, supposed to. So that's sort of the idea of this triclinium. They weren't sitting around a table, but they were all on one side. So maybe Leonardo da Vinci's sort of right in that, but it wasn't a table like we in the West think. If it was a table, it would have been very low. Probably wasn't. It was probably just mats that they could have set up for how many people were going to be in there. And that's how they would have set it up. They would have served the Romans and the Judeans. That was how they did it then. And there were strict rules to where people sat. If you came in and you'd let the guest, you would let the leader of that group tell you, or the head person tell you where your place was. And you can think of an old record in the Gospels where somebody came and sat at the wrong place, and then the master of the house told them to move to a lower spot. He says, better to sit in a low spot and get moved up than to come in and sit at a high spot and get moved down. And so when they came in, Jesus told them where to sit. It's unspoken, but you'll see this in a few minutes. And so there were strict rules to this. And to begin a meal in that culture, not the Roman culture so much, but the Judean, they would wash each other's feet. Or they would wash one person, the lowest servant, the youngest person in the room would wash the feet. And so, of course, you know this unforgettable lesson of love. But this is only recorded in the Gospel of John. The other three cameras weren't rolling: Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So go ahead and go to John 13, and we're going to read 1 through 17. I'm going to read it from the Message. So it's pretty fun to listen to. So you can just listen if you would like. So John 13:1, and just before the Passover feast, Jesus knew that the time had come to leave this world and go to the Father, having loved his dear companions. Now, who's still in this room at this time? Judas. Judas is right there. And more than likely, he's sitting on one side of Jesus or the other. He's in one of the honored spots. This is how much Jesus loved people and would try to save them from themselves. He continued to love them right to the end. It was supper time. The devil by now had Judas, son of Simon the Iscariot, firmly in his grasp. Remember, he had already cracked a deal the night before, and he came out to hang out the next day with them. Just how hard, how crazy, what would be going on in his head? What would he have had to do in his mind to hate Jesus to that degree? All is set for the betrayal. Jesus knew the Father had put him in complete charge of everything, that he came from God and was on the way back to God. So he got up from the supper table, set aside his robe, put on an apron, and he poured water into a basin and began to wash the feet of the disciples, drying them with his apron. And when he got to Simon Peter, Peter said, Master, you wash my feet? And Jesus said, you don't understand what I'm doing. It will be clear enough to you later. And Peter persisted, you're not going to wash my feet ever! You know where Peter was probably sitting? The very last place. Jesus Christ, what was the lesson that he had been teaching for weeks? The greater the leader, the greater the servant. So where did he put Peter? At the lowest place. It's wild, because if this had to happen, it would have caused other people to do things. And he said, you're not going to wash my feet ever. And Jesus said, if I don't wash you, you can't be a part of what I'm doing. Master, said Peter, not only my feet, then wash my hands, wash my head. Jesus said, if you had a bath in the morning, you only need your feet washed now, and you're clean from head to toe. My concern, you understand, is holiness, not hygiene. So now you're clean, but not every one of you. Not every one of you's clean. He knew who was betraying him. That's why he said, not every one of you. After he'd finished washing their feet, he took his robe, put it back on, and went back to his place at the table. Then he said, do you understand what I've done to you? You address me as teacher and master, and rightly so. That's what I am. So if I, the master, the teacher, washed your feet, you must now wash each other's feet. I've laid down a pattern for you. What I've done, you do. I'm only pointing out the obvious. A servant is not ranked above his master. An employee doesn't give orders to the employer. If you understand what I'm telling you, act like it and live a blessed life. It's not about you. It's about others. The greater the leader, the greater the servant. And there's never a greater leader on earth than Jesus Christ. Now think about two lessons in service. One was the woman, right? Now this next one was this washing of feet. Now the meal hadn't even started yet. Then he reminds them in Mark 14 again about that there's going to be a betrayal. One of them is going to betray him. And they all said, is it me? Is it me? Am I going to be the one to do it? And then it goes right into this memorial of communion, and which is Mark 14 through 18. I'm not going to take the time to read this whole thing. Mark 14, 18 through 24, should I say. And so he instituted this memorial of communion that most Christians do religiously once a week or once a year, depending on your brand of Christianity. And so this is where Jesus passes around a piece of this flat bread, and he tears off a piece, and he passes around the wine, and they take a bite, and he goes, this represents my body that's broken for your healing. Remember that. And then he goes, that what you're drinking, it represents my blood. Represents my blood shed for you, for your forgiveness of sins. Remember that. And the first century church did it most of their fellowship meetings. And remember, their fellowship meetings were probably in that same format, was around a meal. And they would have had wine, they would have had bread. Bread was the most common part of a meal. It's sort of a memory peg of health, something to do every day. If you remind yourself what Jesus Christ accomplished each and every day, every snack, every drink, every sip, you will live longer and you will be more healthy. It's promised. Read 1 Corinthians 11, the last few verses in there. 1 Corinthians 11, 17 through 31. It will heal your mind and life if all day long you're saying, I'm healed, I'm healed, I'm healed. Every time you eat something, every time you drink, I'm forgiven. You think we'd have better mental health? Yeah. If I'm forgiven, it's easier to forgive somebody else so you don't have that bitterness. People who determine, if they tell you that they're going to die, they usually will. And I've seen it twice. I've known two friends who told me they were going to die before they're 55, and both of them did. Both of them did. I was taught my whole life that the Wallaces don't get sick. And I can hardly remember being sick. But it was drilled into my head. What do you drill into your head? So, enough on that. Now we're going to talk about the default conversation. Now, Judas now knows Jesus is going to take he's going to take the disciples. And so, right after the communion that he did with them, he leaves the room. And he goes out and he starts rounding up his posse of the temple guards. And the rest were blissfully unaware of what really happened. So much so that they fell into that default argument that they've had all year long. Remember what that is? Who's the greatest? Who's the greatest? Now just imagine the Last Supper, next day the master's going to be dead, and they just revert right back to this same old conversation. And especially after these 2 lessons of service. It's amazing. And Luke 22, we're going to read 23 and 24. It says, "And they began to inquire among themselves which of them it was that should do this thing." So first they ask, is it me, is it me, is it me? And then they shift to, I wonder if it's you, or is it you, or is it you? And then they start pointing the fingers. Who is it now? And they're inquiring, they're asking, is it you? Is it you? Are you the one who's going to turn them in? Instead of, is it me? So you see how the whole thing's turning now. And verse 24, "And there was also strife among them. Which of them should be accounted the greatest?" So 2 things. They ask each other if they were the one to betray Jesus. And number 2, they argued about which of them was the greatest. And this was a daily argument. See, the word strife in Greek is the word philonikeia. And philonikeia in Greek means the love of a good argument. That's the word strife. They just love to argue. Now, maybe you came from a family like that, where you'd sit around at the dinner table and everybody's just, trying to one-up each other on a story. Well, what do you mean you jumped over, 3 cars with your motorcycle? I did 5! And it's just always something better. Who's the greatest? That's what this was. Oh, you did that? That's nothing. You gave $100, I gave $200. It's just always, who's the greatest? And a lot of families, you might have seen that kind of thing. That's what was going on here. These guys were for the most part, friends. You ever go back home and see your old high school buddies or your cousins, and don't they always bring up that same thing that you were talking about 10 years ago? That's what they're doing here. It's the default conversation. On this night, after the expensive perfume was poured on Jesus, after he washed their feet, after the first communion, after he told them that one of them would betray him, they go back into that year-long campfire argument about who's the greatest. These guys were close, and they loved to banter. Even when the pressure was on like that, they just loved to talk. And they did it right in front of Jesus Christ. Look how they reproved that woman. You're wasting money pouring that. What are you doing? He's like, I'm right here, guys. I'm right here. He heard all this stuff. And he's heard who's the greatest. Now, he just told him all this stuff. But he's gonna, for once and for all, he's gonna address this one last time. This is the last time he ever did it on earth. It's probably important. So Luke 22, verse 25. And he said unto them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and they that exercise authority upon them that are called benefactors. Just leadership. Boom, boom, boom. But ye shall not be so, but he that is greatest among you, let him be as the younger. Now where did the younger sit? Over there. And the younger was the one who was supposed to wash the feet, was the one who's supposed to pour the wine, get more bread. The younger did everything. If you were ever younger in a family, did they make you do all the work? Probably. My daughter complains that my son, when we would go out and leave him in charge, he made her do all his work. She was the younger. And he that is chief as he that doth serve. You think you're chief? Then serve. For whether is greater, he that sitteth at meat or he that serveth? Is it not he that sitteth at meat? I mean, that should be the greatest, the person getting served. He said, but I am among you as he that serveth. Ye are they which have continued with me in my temptations. You've been with me since that time that I went through those temptations. These guys, they've been with him from the beginning. And I appoint unto you a kingdom as my Father hath appointed me, that ye may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. You think they finally got their answer? So who's the greatest? You're all the greatest. You're all the greatest. Think about this also, is to judge the 12 doesn't mean that they're always going to be the leader. But there is going to be a day of judgment for the just and the unjust, right? So they're the ones who will be heading that up. Pretty interesting, huh? So they're all the greatest. They're all going to rule in some way someday. But the greatest leader is, in God's eyes, is always the one who's willing to lay down his life for other people. That's the greatest leader. Who are you going to serve? Luke 22:31. And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for thee, that thy faith, thy believing, fail not. And when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren. He's telling them to do exactly what he's been teaching all night. And what I'm thinking here is there's always somebody recruiting you. Always somebody recruiting you. The word desired, where Satan desired, means demanded. Demanded. Satan demanded you, Peter. How would Jesus know this? Revelation. And it means to obtain by asking. Now, isn't there a principle in life? Ye have not because ye ask not. Ask and ye shall receive. The devil even knows that. That's something. It's just believing. Even he has to believe. Isn't that crazy? He has to believe. He demands it. He pictures it. He wants Peter. Why? He's a leader. You get the leader. Yeah, you got the followers. See, the devil wants your best. God wants your best. To sift like wheat, I used to think it was that God wants the good part and the devil wants the bad part. Now I realize they both want the good part. Because what good's the bad part? Not good for anything. You see, you choose who recruits you. I remember when my son got recruited to play college baseball. And, he only received one letter. And so he chose this one school, which was University of Toledo. After he signed his letter of intent, the coach came up to him and said, "Oh, I'm sorry," and handed him a stack of letters. The coach never gave him the letters from all the other ones. So he didn't have much of a choice. But imagine having a bunch of choices. You choose who recruits you. It's your choice. Or is it going to be the devil or is it going to be God? We saw what Judas did. You see, keep your goodness by helping others. Give rather than take. So, see, the next hour that happened, hour or so, while they're laying around that food area and they're facing each other, Jesus Christ pops off some of the most amazing teachings that have ever been. And it was followed by a question and answer time. And, he tells Peter that you're going to deny, he's going to deny him multiple times. And Jesus tells Peter that he's going to go and prepare a place for him. And then when Thomas heard that, wherever Thomas is sitting, he goes, "Where are you going? Where's this place?" And Jesus said back to Thomas, but everybody in that room could hear, he said, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life, and no man comes to the Father but by me." That's when it was said to those 12 people, but really in direct answer to Thomas. And then Philip, another one of the apostles, he says, "Hey, can you show us?" He goes, "I'm going to the Father." And he goes, and Philip said, "Why don't you show us who the Father? Show us this Father that you're talking about." And Jesus said, he said that quota in John 14:12, "The same works that I do shall ye do also, and greater works than these shall ye do, because I go into my Father." It was said at that Last Supper. Isn't that crazy? To that group. And then he said, "And I'm going to send a comforter to you. I'm going to send a comforter to help you." And then the other Judas, there was two guys named Judas who were apostles. He said, "Well, when are you going to manifest yourself in this new body? When are we going to see who you really are?" And Jesus said, then he comes back to the comforter example again, and he tells Judas, he said that this comforter, he's going to show you what's up. This comforter, this Holy Spirit, this gift of Holy Spirit that's going to be in you is going to show you things that you need to see, and it's going to remind you of things that you need to be reminded of. That's a pretty cool lesson. Look how many times Jesus Christ had to remind these guys about leadership and service. The Holy Spirit that's in every one of you can remind you any time of the day or night. It's an incredible connection. And then the last thing that happened before they walk out of this upper room, where they leave that house, is they sang this song. And so I started looking up what song would have been sung around the Passover time. And it would have been a psalm. And they would have sung, during Passover, everyone sang Psalm 113 through 118. 113 and 114, and they talk about the first Passover, before the Exodus. That's what all these are about. And it's called the Great Hallel, or the Hallelujah. And these few. And 115 to 118 are sung after the meal. So which ones do you think he sang then after the meal? Probably 1:15 to 1:18. And one of the final lines in Psalm 118, and it really shocked me. Now, Jesus Christ knows he's going into a terrible place. He knows he's going to be beat beyond recognition. He knows his body's going to be pulled apart. Meat's going to be ripped off of him. It's all in the prophecies. It's not like the pictures in our Bibles. He knows it's going to happen. He knows he's going to be killed. He's going to be buried, dead, and that he's going to raise from the dead again. And one of the lines in this song is, "This is the day the Lord hath made. We will rejoice and be glad in it." And that's right at the end of Psalm 118. What an attitude. What an attitude they leave with. You know, now they walk down the stairs, all 12 of them. Judas is already gone. He's rounding up all the bad guys. They leave one of the gates of the temple. If you think about the temple, let's say it's right here. Then Jerusalem's on a hill, and then it goes down into a valley. And on this side of the valley is the brook Kidron. It's a stream. Then it goes up into what is called the Mount of Olives. Someday I'm going to figure out what they grow on that Mount of Olives. You know, someday I'll figure that one out. I haven't researched that up enough. But they come out, they leave the city, and then they walk out, they walk downhill, then they cross this brook, then they go up into this Mount of Olives, heading toward this place called the Garden of Gethsemane, which was an orchard. It was a beautiful place. And on this this trip, you know, they're going up. These 12 guys are going up one side, and then about 600 people are coming up the other side of that. And it took some time. He didn't just walk up quickly, because a couple of hours go by. He pops off another teaching, and remember, then he tells them to stay here and to pray. Then he takes John and James and Peter off a little ways further, and he goes, "You guys sit here now, and you pray." And then he goes a stone's throw distance. So as far as you could throw a stone, Jesus goes that much further away, and he prays alone. And it says that's when he prayed. You know, I mean, in fact, there's a whole chapter talking about a prayer that he did. And all these teachings, it's fun to read. There just isn't time to do it at a meeting like this. But he goes off. He came back once, and he finds these guys asleep. And they weren't just asleep, nodding their heads like this. They'd gone into the position of sleep. They laid on the ground. They made a little pillow or something, and they went to sleep. Then he wakes them up. He goes off again. He comes back a little while later. They're asleep again. He goes off again, and this time he's in agonizing pain. And where it says that he sweated like great drops of blood, that's only in Luke. What was Luke's profession? He was a physician. It's a medical term, and it's I think it's pronounced hermetrodosis. And it's literally, there are people who under times of great duress, they sweat blood. Your blood vessels break and they sweat. Leonardo da Vinci talks about there was that one warrior in Rome, and every time, right before he went to battle, he literally sweated blood. And you look it up online, Google it, and you'll see people, there's still people who do it. And but it almost only happens when somebody knows they're just about to die. They're walking into a deadly situation. So it's crazy. So he probably literally sweated blood. The blood vessels break inside your sweat glands, and it comes out. You notice when you get real nervous, you're sweaty too. And it was just dripping out of him. And then he walks back to these guys with blood all over his face. Why are you sleeping? You know, it says he was in agony. in Luke 22. It's something. And so these guys are nighty-night. Then he finally comes up to them, and in Mark 14:41, he cometh the third time, and he saith unto them. Now he knew he was going to die, you got to remember. What would you feel like if you know in just a few minutes or a few hours that was it? You just gave your life for a bunch of guys who aren't really getting it, it seems like. One of your most trusted followers sold you out. How weird would that be? And it says in 41 of Mark 14, and he cometh the third time and saith unto them, sleep on now and take your rest. It's enough, the hour is come. Behold, the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. He isn't really, it sounds like he's saying, just go back to sleep. But it means, you can think of it like a question. It's like, get up now. You've had your sleep. It's enough. It's enough. The word enough is a technical term that means to give a receipt. For us, it may mean now is when you collect your pay. Now it's game time. Get up. It's on. That's what Jesus said. Wake up, guys. It's on. It's payday. It's time to collect your pay. This is what we've paid. This is what we've worked up to the whole year right now. It's go time. And at that very moment, the crowd, he hears a rustle of swords and sticks and people crushing through this olive orchard from the other side. And who's right in the front of that group but Judas? So this finishes those two suppers. And this is what happened. This is right before he's taken captive. The last two suppers. And the great lesson in these things is the greater the leader, the greater the servant. And that's a lesson of the last two suppers. God bless.